Questions of Doom.
If I were a rich man, ba 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 ba. Oh, hello. You just caught me in the bath. Oh, that's right. Yes, sorry. We're here to film a Questions of Doom video. In that case, I suppose, welcome back to another Questions of Doom. In this series, as ever, I attempt to answer questions that you send my way using the archaeosoup@gmail.com email address, as displayed on the YouTube channel homepage, as you'll also see at the end of this video. In answering these questions by video, it is my hope that the answer is not only useful to the person who has asked the question, but also anyone else out there who may be wondering the same thing. Now, today's question of doom, actually, funnily enough, was from someone in the bath. Dear Mr. Soup, they said, I was sitting in the bath the other day when a thought occurred to me. If I just stay here for long enough, will I become a bog body? Then I remembered Silence of the Lambs and what happened to the first body in the water. And for those of you who haven't seen Silence of the Lambs, or who are possibly too young to see it just yet, essentially there's a body that's been floating in water for a long time and it's not very well preserved at all. It's sort of starting to come apart, I suppose. That's the nicest way I can put it. So, how exactly does one become a bog body? I hope this is a good question. Thanking you in advance, Tolland Fan. That's a good pun. Tolland Man is a very famous bog body, so Tolland Fan is clearly a play on words. Well, Tolland Fan, you do in fact ask a very good question. But I suppose the key problem with your surmisings is the fact that actually a bath is nothing like the environment where bog bodies are dumped and then eventually preserved thousands of years later. A bath is actually filled with oxygen. Of course, you couldn't breathe that oxygen, but all the movement in the water, the movement from the tap, it introduces elements of oxygen to the water. And still or fresh water in the wild is also teeming with life because of it. You've got fish, you've got bacteria, you've got all sorts of elements which make that a living environment. Whereas bog bodies do not happen in a living environment, or in a very, very living environment. Specifically, they tend to happen in peat bogs. Now, peat bog sort of wetland areas are places where vegetable matter, usually reeds and other sort of boggy kind of plants, moss, they grow and then they die, but they grow and die usually, often without rotting. So what you end up with is an environment which is just filling up with vegetable matter, with biomass, I suppose, and not much in the way of bacterial activity is occurring. There's no rotting happening. It's just adding up and then flattening down and adding up and building up, and out of this comes a very anoxic environment, an environment which hasn't got much oxygen there at all. Now, this is because because often these places are very stagnant areas, so the water isn't moving, air isn't being introduced to that environment. So what you have is these layers of plant matter, nothing in the way of rotting, no oxygen, and therefore microbes find it very hard to exist in that environment. You don't really get the types of microbes and bacteria and organisms which break down, for example, human bodies in the same way in a peat bog as you would, for example, in fresh water, or in, to a certain extent, I suppose, places like the ocean. What you're talking about is a very lifeless environment, and crucially lacking oxygen, anoxic. Now you also, as part of this process, you often get something called sphagnum moss growing. And sphagnum moss has been shown to be a result actually of deforestation in large parts of Britain. But it's very acidic, it thrives in very acidic environments, and it adds to those environments. It also takes away any remaining nutrients from those environments. So again, it's reducing the ability of life to actually exist within the peat bog. Sphagnum moss, incidentally, apparently makes an excellent toilet roll substitute For example, Ötzi the Iceman apparently was found with some sphagnum moss on his person, and that was probably to be used as toilet roll in the wilds. Now, so this environment is more or less lifeless. There's no bacteria, there's no oxygen, and into this peat bog you drop a person, a human body. And what happens to them, well, is surprisingly little. They simply sink and then they flatten out. And actually, through the action of plants like sphagnum moss, calcium is leached from their bodies, so the bones often go very floppy or disappear entirely. And also they take on sort of a brownish hue because of there's a certain amount of I suppose, tanning that goes on with the skin. So often bog bodies will be very brown when you find them. My personal favourite, actually, bog body of all time is Lindo Man, found not too far away from where I was born, in fact.
Now, unfortunately, Lindo Man was chopped in half by a peat bog harvesting machine. Peat is, after all, a fuel. But for the most part, bog bodies are incredibly well preserved. Though their appearance has been altered, and to some may look bizarre, even ghastly, everything from internal organs to tattoos can be preserved in this way. Because of a lack of microbial activity, features of the skin remain, and even hair. Here, for example, is a hairstyle preserved intact because of a bog environment. Of course, other things also survive well. Here are a pair of shoes found with a bog body. But for me, the bodies themselves are often hauntingly beautiful, for everything from fingerprints to stubble on a man's chin can be preserved.
So, in that sense, a peat bog is extremely different to a bath. It could not be more different, really, because a bath, especially when you leave the bath after a bath. Oh, I just turned on the tap there. Especially when you leave the bath, you're leaving elements of living material, like are not in there. But things like, for example, water flowing from taps, things like the bubbles that you may have around you, introduce air into that environment. And air and other nutrients, rather air and nutrients, is what microbial activity thrives on. Microbes need that stuff. And if stuff rots, or rather if you want stuff to rot, that's a wonderful environment to put it in. Whereas a peat bog doesn't have any of that. So I suppose what I would say, Holland fan, is that if you want to be a bog man, if you want to become a bog body, then a bath isn't a good way to go about it. You're quite right. In such environments, the body will essentially begin to rot. It will bloat, it will start to decompose, skin will come off. I mean, I don't want to go too much into detail about that, but it's not a very nice thing to look at. And also, crucially, eventually, it won't be archaeologically all that useful. Well, the skeleton may still be there, but also quite possibly not, depending on, for example, acidity and, again, microbial activity. So the best bet is to get thrown into a bog. That said, though, I wouldn't really recommend it. I mean, it seems that most bog bodies, while they may well have been chosen, for example, for ritual sacrifice and given quite a cushy life in the run-up to the deed, they were nonetheless often beaten or had their throats slit or otherwise attacked to death. So I wouldn't really recommend it. It's not a peaceful way to die, Tom and Fan. So anyway, hopefully this has helped to answer your question. A bath is not a good place to create a bog body because it's filled with oxygen and filled with life. Anyway, if you have any thoughts or questions on bog bodies, please do comment below. I'm sure Holland Fan would like to know more. And hopefully this video has been interesting or useful to you. As I say, I quite like bog bodies, especially Lindo Man, but personally, I don't really want to be one, and I certainly don't want to be preserved in the bath. Anyway, with that in mind, obviously not me in the bath in mind, bog bodies in mind, I'll let you have a discussion below. Until next time, please do take care. Bye-bye.